Now, the age of Jackson is actually not started with Jackson's presidency, because to really understand the age of Jackson, you have to understand that people were fed up with, if you saw part 1 of our 4.1 video, we remember that, like, we have Jefferson, we have Madison, we have Monroe, all of these guys, part of the aristocracy. They're wealthy landowners, living their best life. Well, Jackson kind of comes in and kind of thwarts the idea of what it is to be a political leader. And it really makes some people mad. In fact, in 1824, they do all they can to keep him out of office. And essentially, it's something called the corrupt bargain. In the corrupt bargain, Henry Clay essentially sways people to vote for, put their votes in the House of Representatives towards John Quincy Adams, even though technically Jackson had more electoral votes and popular votes. But he doesn't become president. JQA becomes president. And it is something that Andrew Jackson will call a corrupt bargain, because of a corrupt bargain with Henry Clay. Essentially, he says is why it happens. So the next couple of things we're going to talk about that happen are just kind of some of the hallmarks of his presidency, and something we're going to refer to as Jacksonian Democracy. Now, Jacksonian Democracy is really kind of highlighted by the idea of the common man Next is this idea of popular campaigning. Guys, before, it was seen as kind of like low class to campaign. If people campaigned, it was like, oh my gosh, like, if people like you, they'll vote for you, but like, don't campaign for this award. It would be kind of like if someone campaigned for like an integrity award. It feels weird. Or like if teachers are like, oh, vote for me for like your favorite teacher award. Like there's like it's some kind of like teaching honor for people to nominate. Like, oh, nominate me. Like it feels weird. Now the increase in suffrage. We also see an increase in suffrage specifically for non-land owning white males. So those are kind of the hallmarks of Jacksonian democracy. So we're going to have a couple of things that happen. One of the things we're going to talk about is the Nullification Crisis. We're going to call this Mount Nullification. Crisis. We're going to call this Mount Nullification. And essentially it starts with the tariff of 1828, otherwise known as the Tariff of Abominations. And essentially, South Carolina refuses to pay it. They say, we're not going to pay it, that's silly. Jackson comes back and says, yeah, you have to. Jackson basically says you have to. South Carolina says if you make us, the pinnacle of this, they threaten to secede if this isn't nullified. Jackson sends in the force bill. Jackson sends in the force bill, and Jackson sends in the force bill, which means the military will force them to pay their tariffs. And then the resolution kind of, and there's a big like Webster-Hayne debate. Daniel Webster calls on everyone to unify on the floor of Congress. And then finally, our resolution is attributed to Henry Clay. And we agree to lower tariffs over the next 10 years. We're going to lower the tariffs over the next 10 years. And it's nullification because they wanted to nullify the tax, and it's a crisis because South Carolina threatens secession. That's why we call it the Nullification Crisis. And I just put it on a mountain because I feel like it helps to see kind of like the rising action and then kind of the falling action, what ends up happening. The next piece of this we're going to look at is Worchester v. Georgia. So we're going to go back to kind of our world of court cases. And we're still in John Marshall's court. We have Worchester v. Georgia comes to pass. Now, in Worcester v. Georgia, essentially, the Supreme Court in John Marshall ruled on the side of Sam Worchester. But essentially, Jackson says, okay, well, that's fine, but he famously says, Marshall has made his ruling. Let's see him enforce it. Basically kind of taunting him, saying, look, you can say that this is unconstitutional all you want, but my job is to enforce the law, and I choose not to enforce that. I choose my method of enforcing is going to be really light on that way. And so that kind of caused a big problem for a lot of people. However, typically at the time, the common man appreciated it because they were like, oh good, we get better land. It was not a super popular decision. The Supreme Court decision was not super popular, so when Jackson kind of like blew it off, the people were largely like, oh good, look, he's looking out for us. Weird move. In the next election in 1832, the big debate is over, again, the national bank. And the idea of having a national bank. Henry Clay wants one. Jackson says no. In fact, he hope this is the bank war. He takes the money out of the national bank and he actually puts it into little state banks that he calls pet banks. Think like Teacher's Pet. These were state banks from states that supported him. And so he let all the funding go to these state banks. And he does this because he believes it will help the common man. Now, it ends up kind of like leading to like one of our panics of 1829, things of that nature. But during this time as well, it's important to note that there was this guy who comes in from France. I'm like, I don't know what it says about us that like as a country we're like, you know what? This guy one time wrote a book about how great we are and we still teach them in schools today. And he writes this book that essentially says like what's so different about Americans from Europeans. And he writes about American exceptionalism. This idea of American exceptionalism, and a couple of the things that he harkens on is liberty, populism, individualism, laissez-faire economics, And then lastly, egalitarianism. Which, liberty, guys, is just freedom. When he says populum, he means the people have a say. The people matter. Individualism, America values the individual more than kind of the group. Laissez-faire is the idea that the economy and the government are two separate entities. And then egalitarianism, which means we believe in fundamental equality and kind of the idea that people should have equal ability, a fair shot and a fair ability to succeed. All right. Hopefully that's helpful. On your test, you will have you're going to be doing thesis and contextualization. On your test. So there will be some writing on your test. There'll be multiple choice and thesis and contextualization. Good luck, folks.